Um, Imagine you're flying a plane for, I don't know, 10 years,
Okay.
and you've never crashed. You feel like this absolute expert pilot, and you are just totally confident in your abilities.
Right, you've got the routine down.
Exactly. But then imagine suddenly realizing you've been doing it entirely blindfolded,
Oh,
right? Just the
yeah.
sheer panic of that. And today's deep dive is actually about that exact terrifying moment of realization.
It's a very relatable feeling, honestly.
It really is. Have you ever had one of those moments where you realize you've been doing something for years, maybe even decades, entirely just on a gut feeling?
Oh, for sure.
Like you have a routine, you trust the process, and you just assume it's working because, well, nothing has explicitly exploded yet.
Right, right.
But then you stop and think, wait, do I actually have any hard data to prove this is optimal?
Right.
Or have I just been incredibly lucky this whole time?
It's just a universally humbling human experience. I mean, we build these massive structures of habit in our lives, and they're entirely supported by
And
assumptions.
visual cues, right?
Yeah, visual cues. And we call it expertise. We get very comfortable in that space of not entirely knowing, but feeling like we do.
Yeah.
It's a very cozy place to live, right up until the moment it isn't.
And that tension, that exact moment of waking up from the comfort of a trusted routine and suddenly just like craving hard data, that is the mission of our deep dive today.
I love that.
Yeah, we're looking at a single, honestly, incredibly reflective note from a longtime fish keeper.
Right, which is such a niche space, but so relevant.
Exactly. They're documenting this exact philosophical shift, moving from this intuitive, qualitative way of managing their aquariums to a sudden, almost desperate desire for precise quantitative measurement.
And it is a micro story, really.
Yeah, just a few paragraphs,
It's just a few paragraphs about aquarium water quality. But if
Mhm.
we connect this to the bigger picture,
which we always try to do.
it is a profound look at how we navigate the invisible metrics that govern, well, any healthy ecosystem, whether that ecosystem is a glass box full of water sitting in your living room or, our own daily lives.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the way this source describes their baseline, the way they've been doing things for, quote, so many moons, is just fascinating.
It really paints a picture.
It does. It paints a picture of this era of deep biological trust. Like before they ever felt the need for data, they had a system.
And it was a system built entirely on natural processes and, frankly, patience.
Right. They described their water preparation as incredibly simple. It basically involved one of two steps.
Okay.
Step one, just use aged water,
Which means what to them?
meaning they literally just left the water out for at least 24 hours. Just let it sit there in a bucket.
Wow. Okay.
Or step two, they treated it with a chemical dechlorinator. And that's it. That is the foundation of their entire aquatic world.
It perfectly illustrates this era of biological trust. You're not measuring the specific parts per million of anything in that bucket.
No, not at all.
You're just trusting the invisible process of time passing.
Yeah, just waiting it out.
Exactly. And then to maintain that world, to keep the water quality where it needed to be once the fish were actually in it, they didn't rely on chemistry sets or digital monitors.
Right. The source lists their maintenance ecosystem. And it's basically sponge filters, aquatic plants, snails, and the occasional water change. Snails.
Mm.
You are literally delegating your ecosystem management to snails and plants.
It's so wild to think about.
It really reminds me of cooking a really complex family recipe entirely by taste and smell.
Oh, that's a good comparison.
Yeah, like you aren't using measuring cups, you aren't weighing the flour down to the gram, you're just throwing a pinch of this and a dash of that, and you're letting the ingredients do the heavy lifting.
Right. You trust the yeast to rise.
Exactly. You trust the heat to caramelize. And in this case, you trust the snails to do whatever snails do.
But there is one massive caveat to that soup analogy.
What's that?
Well, if you mess up the soup by eyeballing the salt, the worst case scenario is, you order takeout.
Fair point. Yeah.
If you misjudge the assumed equilibrium of a fish tank, the entire ecosystem suffocates.
Well, yeah, that's dark.
The stakes for this gut feeling are literally life and death.
Hmm.
But your point about delegating the management is spot on. You assume the water is fine simply because the system hasn't collapsed.
Because it's still moving.
Right. Relying on plants and snails and a sponge filter, it's a highly visual, physical way of managing an environment. You can physically see a plant growing.
Yeah, or you see a snail cleaning the glass.
Exactly. You are managing the macro and just assuming the micro is taking care of itself.
But here's where I want to push back a little bit. or at least where I think anyone listening might push back.
Okay, go for it.
Because the source notes something really crucial here to validate this old method. They point out that this biological, low-tech, gut-feeling method, it isn't just them being lazy or naive.
Right.
They explicitly state, honestly, this is the typical approach used in most fish stores.
The industry standard.
Yeah. If this is the industry standard, if the professional fish stores, the people whose entire livelihoods depend on keeping fish alive, are using this exact same aged water and snails method, why would anyone ever need to change it?
That's a very fair question.
I mean, why fix what fundamentally isn't broken?
Well, it creates a consensus of comfort, sure.
Consensus of comfort, I like that.
Yeah, but we have to remember that surviving isn't the same as thriving.
Oh, interesting.
Think about the actual business model of a fish store. It is basically a temporary holding facility.
Right, they just need the fish to live until, like, Tuesday when someone buys them.
Exactly. The turnover is incredibly high, but the hobbyist, on the other hand, is trying to build a permanent, lifelong home.
Ah, okay. That is a huge distinction. The fish store is just the waiting room.
Precisely. Which is why the author was able to stick with this method for so many moons. When the authority figures in a space model, a behavior, it gives you permission to just rest easy in your assumptions.
Because you're like, well, the pros do it.
Right. But to answer your question of why anyone would ever change a system that seems to be working, we have to look at what happens when the environment around that comfortable consensus actually shifts.
And that brings us to the inciting incident of this whole text. The catalyst for quantification, really.
Yeah.
Because something happens that shatters this status quo. The author doesn't just wake up one day and decide to hate snails.
No, the catalyst is highly specific.
It is. They're facing an empty aquarium tank. And their goal is to introduce new fish species.
That's the tipping point.
Yeah, they're looking to stock this empty tank, and while looking for these new fish, they stumble upon these 6-in-1 test strips. And suddenly, the old way just isn't good enough anymore.
Not at all.
But why does an empty tank and a new species suddenly invalidate years of success?
Because the risk profile has entirely changed.
It's like, okay, imagine you've been jogging around your neighborhood for years, right?
Okay.
You don't track your pace, you don't wear a smartwatch, you just jog by feel.
Mm-hmm.
And it works. You're healthy.
Right, you're doing fine.
But then you decide to sign up for a completely new type of marathon, maybe like an ultra marathon or a trail run at high altitude.
Oh, wow.
Suddenly, running by feel seems terrifying.
Yeah.
You go straight to the store and buy a heart rate monitor, not because your body changed, but because the challenge changed.
That is exactly the psychological shift happening here. A new variable, new fish species introduces a totally new level of risk.
Yeah.
When you are keeping the same fish for years, you know their behaviors. You know what they look like when they're healthy.
You have a baseline.
Right. You have a visual baseline, but a new species, you don't have that visual baseline anymore. You completely lose your intuition.
You can't just look at a new fish and say, oh, he's acting normal because you don't know what his normal is yet.
Exactly. The old trusted methods are suddenly viewed as a liability because the stakes have fundamentally changed. You are bringing a new life form into a glass box, and you realize you don't actually know for a fact what the environment inside that box is.
And there's another detail here that I think plays a huge role in this shift.
What's that?
The source specifically mentions that they bought the 6-in-1 test strips because, quote, they're affordable.
Ah, yes. The barrier to entry for certainty has dropped dramatically.
Right. If these test strips cost like $500, I bet the author would have just crossed their fingers, bought the fish, and trusted the sponge filter again.
Oh, without a doubt.
But because they are affordable, it's almost like you have no excuse anymore not to know. It represents how incredibly easy it is to cross that threshold from blissful ignorance to data-driven certainty.
It is the temptation of data. When the tool to measure your reality becomes cheap and accessible, ignoring it starts to feel like negligence.
Yeah, that makes sense.
The affordability of the strips completely strips away the defense of, well, it's too complicated or too expensive to measure.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Let's look at what these affordable strips are actually measuring.
Okay.
Because we are transitioning here from visible biology, plants, the snails, to invisible chemistry. And the list of what these 6-in-1 strips evaluate is intense.
It is a sudden onslaught of variables.
It really is.
Yeah.
The source lists them out. The strips evaluate nitrate, nitrite, chlorine, total hardness, which they note as GH carbonate, noted as KH, and pH levels.
And that is a lot.
That is 6 distinct, complex chemical parameters. And the author openly admits that for all their years of fish keeping, they hadn't bothered checking these.
Wow.
My question is, how is it even possible to successfully maintain a living, breathing ecosystem for years while being completely 100% blind to 6 critical chemical parameters?
What's fascinating here is the contrast between macromanagement and micromanagement.
Okay, see more about that.
Well, these 6 parameters, the nitrates, the carbonates, all of it, they have always been there.
Right.
They have been dictating the reality of the tank behind the scenes every single day. The author's old method of using snails and sponge filters and aging the water, that was actually managing these parameters.
Oh, they just didn't know the names for them.
Exactly. They were managing the ecosystem through action, not through measurement. The shift to using the 6-in-1 strips is a profound shift from managing what you can see to managing what you cannot.
It is a loss of innocence in a way.
It totally is. Once you know you have to worry about, like, your exact carbonate levels, you can never go back to just looking at a snail and saying, looks fine to me.
You have burdened yourself with knowledge.
You have traded the comfort of assumption for the anxiety of precision.
The anxiety of precision. That is exactly it. And you can feel that anxiety creeping in as the author outlines their grand experiment.
Yes, the experiment.
Because they aren't just going to test this new empty tank.
Yeah.
Now that they have the strips, now that they have the power to see the invisible chemistry, they are going to test everything.
The scientific method has officially entered the chat.
Big time. The source notes that they bought the pack of strips to see how effective their old approach really is, and they plan to test both their indoor aquarium tanks and their outdoor ponds.
Which is such a crucial distinction.
Why is that?
Well, they are taking their new quantitative tool and deploying it across 2 highly varied environments. An indoor aquarium is a heavily controlled environment.
Right, it's in a house.
Exactly. The temperature is relatively stable, the lighting is regulated, it's safe. But an outdoor pond?
Oh, that's total chaos.
Complete chaos. It is exposed to the elements, to rain, to whatever runs off the patio, to wild temperature swings between day and night.
Wow, yeah, I didn't even think about that.
By testing both, the author is challenging their core assumptions across the entire spectrum of their experience.
I just have to point out the bravery of this step.
Definitely.
Testing the water, especially water you've managed for years, using your trusted intuitive routine, means facing the very real possibility that your routine was actually deeply flawed.
It takes guts to dip that strip into the water.
It really does.
Yeah.
Because what if you've been wrong this whole time? What if your fish have just been toughing it out in terrible water, surviving instead of thriving?
It is the ultimate test of the ego versus the desire for truth.
Oh, that's deep.
Think about it. When you rely on a gut feeling, you can always rationalize your way out of a problem. If a plant dies or a fish looks sluggish, you just say, well, it was just a weak plant, or that fish was getting old anyway.
Right. You blame external factors. You protect your own expertise.
But when you have a piece of paper that gives you a numerical value for your nitrate levels or shows you that your pH is completely off, you cannot argue with it.
No, you can't.
Data strips away your ability to self-deceive.
They are asking the ultimate question. Have we actually achieved optimal water quality? Are all these invisible parameters within the normal range?
Right.
And the text ends on this massive cliffhanger. Quote, I'm looking forward to sharing those results in the next post. Till the next post.
It is a wonderful moment of suspense.
It really is.
It completely captures the tension between hoping you were right all along and preparing to find out you were completely wrong.
You can just picture them standing there, right, holding this little plastic strip, waiting for the colors to change, realizing that the results might completely invalidate so many moons of perceived expertise.
And that is the terrifying beauty of moving from qualitative intuition to quantitative measurement. It forces an honest reckoning.
So what does this all mean for us? Like when we pull back from the fish tanks and the test strips and the carbonate shields, what is the core takeaway from this deep dive? We started with a picture of a comfortable natural routine, relying on snails, aging water for 24 hours, trusting the biological process because, hey, it worked for the fish stores.
Right.
Then, prompted by the blank canvas of an empty tank and the introduction of new unknown species, the author buys an affordable tool that suddenly makes 6 complex, invisible parameters visible.
It is a perfect encapsulation of why we suddenly decide to measure things we've taken for granted. We do it because the stakes change. We do it because a new variable makes us realize how fragile our assumptions really are. And we do it because eventually the tools to measure the truth become too accessible to ignore.
It's a micro story about a glass box of water,
Yeah,
but it's really about the broader human instinct to eventually seek hard data to back up our intuition.
absolutely.
We all reach a point where it looks fine, just isn't enough anymore.
Yeah.
We want to know why it's fine. We want to know the chemistry behind the magic. We want the numbers to prove it.
And that leads to a question that I think everyone listening should ponder today.
Let's hear it.
Think about the water quality of your own life's routines. We all have systems we run purely on gut feeling and assumed success.
Oh, for sure.
Think about how you manage your daily energy, how you communicate with your family or your team, or how you balance your time.
Our own personal snails and sponge filters,
Yes.
the things we just assume are working in the background.
Precisely. If you were handed a proverbial 6-in-1 test strip for your daily habits right now, and you dipped it into the routine you've trusted for so many moons, what invisible metrics do you think might surprise you? Are you thriving, or are you just relying on an assumed equilibrium?